Topic of today is mobilizing the resources for the startup. In the last lecture, we started talking about the project report, how the resources are collected, agglomerated factors, deglomerative factors, what are the basic steps in the process which the entrepreneur will follow in order to start his business. So he has to collect the product which he is interested into, he has to collect the in-depth knowledge about the market, about the competitors, about the government policy, so on and so forth. And then, of course, after getting the clearances from all the allied institutions which are connected, because we have to have the environmental clearance, and this is what we stressed upon in the last lecture also. Because we have a pollution control board, we have the environmental clearances, environmental impact analysis, and so on and so forth. If all the things are in place, now is the time to mobilize the resources for the startup. Every entrepreneur, after getting the approval for the business proposal and getting it registered and obtaining the required licensing, they can obviously proceed to a very formal process of setting up a new enterprise. This starts with the mobilization of resources, which is the process of assembling and organizing all the necessary resources for bringing an enterprise into an existence. Usually, the following resources are produced and are mobilized. As a matter of fact, when you talk about any kind of an entrepreneurial activity, it is all about the collection of all the land, labor, capital, entrepreneur, the living resources, the non-living resources. Immense ocean of information is of course needed to basically start the concept of any kind of a startup. When the entrepreneur is fine enough, when the entrepreneur is happy enough that he has collected immense resources, now is the time for him to start up, and to start up the main things which are required is the financial resources. It is the foremost requirement to arrange the requisite finance for meeting the other resource requirement. It is also called as the vitamin M for the business. It is the life stream of the business, it is the focus of the business, it is the nucleus of the business. If you do not have the required financial resources, everything would be multiplied by 0. Because for everything we needed the financial resources for us to start up any kind of a business, be it a startup, be it any kind of a business. After making the study of the funds availability with himself, the entrepreneur will procure the remaining funds from the outside resources. Now, this is a conceptual aspect which the entrepreneur has to be very careful about. The first thing which he has to study and analyze, that how much resources he himself has. Are the resources which he has are fair enough, are sufficient enough to start the business? If yes, he will move ahead. If not, he has to actually procure the funds from the outside agencies, from the outside sources of finance, and then of course he will be able to take care of the various in-depth need of the financial resources. Now, the mobilizing resources for the startup. We have the long-term funds, that is we have the equity, we have the preference shares, we have the debentures, we have the loans from the financial institutions, we have the public deposits, etc. They are basically required to buy the fixed assets and maintaining the minimum working capital. Now, as a matter of fact, any kind of an entrepreneur will look for the funds or of two types. One, for the day-to-day working of the business, we call it as a working capital. To buy the fixed assets for the business, we call it as the fixed assets. For taking care of these two aspects, that is taking care of the minimum working capital and taking care of the fixed assets, we need to have the funds with us, and the long-term funds are basically very essential to take care of the overall financial needs for the startup to start. We have the equity funds. When you call it as an equity funds, it is the owner's funds, that is whatever money you have. Then we have a preference shares who get a preference over all types of other securities in the business. Then we have a debenture. Debenture is a loan from the public which carries a fixed rate of interest, and it could be any kind of a public deposit or taking a loan from any financial institution which carries a particular the fixed interest securities, because whenever you take any kind of a loan from the financial institutions, you have to pay the rate of interest to them. Similarly, the PDs, that is the public deposits. Now, as far as the public deposits are concerned, nowadays this concept has really gone into depth. Because people are not interested, they do not have the trust in a particular company. So, the ratio of the yesteryears and the ratio of the current year as far as the public deposits are concerned is really going down. Then we have a short-term funds requirement, and we call it as a working capital. The short-term funds include the trade creditors, commercial banks, customer advances, deposits, borrowing, etc. They are required to meet the seasonal and the cyclical variations of day-to-day expenses. Now, basically the concept which I have given you, they are really helping us in procuring the short-term needs for any kind of a business, and we also call it as a working capital. Like we have the trade creditors with us, we have the commercial banks who are taking care of our short-term needs, the customer advances, the deposits, the borrowing, etc. So, they are basically changing from day to day experience, because they keep changing because of the cyclical demand, because of the seasonal demand, and this is all taking care of the short term funds for any kind of a business or a startup. So, after taking care of the financial needs, we need to mobilize the human resources also, because whatever you collect, whatever you do, if you do not have the the requisite human resources with you, then you cannot do anything, because it is the only living factor in the organization which is going to convert, to collect the resources. It is the human resource which collects the resources, it is the human resource which transforms the resources, and so on and so forth. So, you need to have a right number of the people, right kind of the people who takes care of the work from time to time, and they will all set the work on the path of the success for any kind of an entrepreneur. Now, the human resource is the most important resource which sets the other resources to utilization. If the human resources are not there, then who is going to touch them, who is going to convert them, who is going to transform them? So, it is the human resources only which is taking care of almost all types of resources, which sets the resources to utilization and taking it into use or putting it into use. So, the requirement, acquiring of the right number, the right type of the people who will work for the entrepreneur becomes a next important resource to be mobilized. Now, there is a basic underlying concept that neither the number of the people should be more, nor the number of the people should be less. Why? Because if the number of the people are more, it is going to have a lot of problems, a lot of financial stress onto the business, and if the people are less, then of course the whole work will suffer on account of less or the scarcity of the labor. So, you have to have a judicious number, a rational number, a right kind of a number of the people who are working with you and the type of the people you want to keep the enterprise going. Now, when you talk about the workers, you have two types of people. You have a skilled labor, you have an unskilled labor. So, it includes the skilled as well as the unskilled manpower, ranging from topmost to the bottom one. The human resources must be chosen very carefully, as they will be responsible for the optimum utilization of other resources. Now, basically, when you have to have an unskilled labor, that is for the routine job, you might be hiring an unskilled labor, but you need to have a skilled labor where the expertise is needed to the par excellence. So, human resources must be chosen very carefully, keeping into consideration the role responsibility which they have to perform, the optimum utilization of the resources which you have to achieve, whether you are going to delegate some kind of a skilled work to them or an unskilled work to them. So, this is how we are going to make up and you are going to top up. Now, the third most important mobilizing resources for the startup is the physical resource. After acquiring the necessary funds and of course arranging for the right number of the human resources, for the entrepreneurs will procure the physical resources like land and building, plant and machinery, furniture and fixtures, raw material, etc. Now, when you have to talk about the mobilizing of the resources for the startup, these are very vital and the pertinent things to set up, because when you have to start with any kind of an entrepreneurial activity, the maximum and the most vital and the pertinent role which is given to the the entrepreneur is to collect everything. Like, you need to have a building, you need to have a land where you're going to set up your office, you need to have a plant and machinery which is going to convert the raw material into the finished goods. You need to have the furniture and the fixtures, which is most important to keep the organization going, and of course you need to have the raw material also, because it is the raw material which is going to be taken up to be converted and transformed into the finished goods, etc. Every enterprise should design and develop a suitable procedure for procurement of the physical resources depending upon the size of the firm and the type of the material required, that is the supply resources, etc. Now we have the first thing which we have done is we have collected the finances, that is the finance mobilization. The second thing which is most important and we have discussed is basically the overall the human resources which you need for an organizations to keep going, and of course a judicious and a right kind of a number which is almost required for an enterprise to move on. Then of course those people could be skilled, they could be unskilled. Then of course the third most important resource mobilization which we have talked now is the collection of the physical resources, which is most importantly required to keep the organization moving, that is land and building, plant and machinery, furniture and fixtures, raw material, etc. Now you have collected almost the three types of things with you. You have mobilized the resources, you have hired the human resource management capital, and you have the physical facilities with you. Now every enterprise should design and develop the procedure to take care of the physical resources. The fourth most important mobilizing resource for any kind of a startup or any kind of a business is a technology. This is the era of knowledge and this is the era of technology. The next important resource to be mobilized is the technology which we will be using for our enterprise. If the technology is to be procured from the outside India, then you have to have a formal approval to take care of that whether you would be allowed to use that technology or not under the foreign direct investment policy and the foreign technology transfer agreement, because the person who has invested time and money and resources under the research and the development aspect and developed a technology, you cannot just use any kind of a technology without taking the required approvals and required sanctions. So it is the time for you to take the approval under the foreign direct investment policy and the foreign technology transfer agreement, because this is the policy and the agreement which is most importantly required for any kind of a startup. Otherwise you will not be able to use that kind of a technology. Now we have done four things. First, finance. Second, HRM, that is the human resource management aspect. The third was the physical facilities, and the fourth was the technology, which is most vital and technical part which every businessman has to take care. Now, the most important mobilizing resource for the startup, the fifth aspect, is your accommodation. It refers to the location of the plant where the business unit will be set up. It includes the main plant location, the warehousing, the packing unit, etc. Now, basically, you have to develop a base for your business, and that base is called as accommodation. It will have, definitely the layout is very important, where the plant will be laid out, where the warehouses will be kept, how the things will be, packed, the packaging unit, the location of the plant, the warehouses location. All these things are enveloped under the umbrella of accommodation. And this is the most vital and important aspect when you have to have a resource mobilization in this regard. Now, it is very essential for every entrepreneur to select the most suitable accommodation for the enterprise, taking into consideration the various factors like nearness to the market and the resource of the raw material, availability of the labor, availability of various utilities, the general climate condition, etc. Now see, these particular decisions are vital. Why? Because if you are into edible concept like biscuits, etc., you need not work in a humid environment, because whatever the concept of the product which you are going to manufacture is not able to have sustainable climate as far as the humid climate is concerned. So you need to have a very judicious understanding that whether the location of the plant, that is the nearness to the market, is available, is important for you, or the source of the raw material is important for you, whether the plant should be located near the market or it should be located near the raw material. Definitely it is a very important aspect that if the raw material which you are using is very bulky and very heavy, the location should be near the raw material, otherwise it is going to add and increase the transportation cost. Similarly, if the raw material which you are using is very light, then of course you will always select the accommodation or the location of your plant which should be near to the market, because these things are going to add and decrease the cost of the labor, availability of the utilities are there. The general climate conditions are also taken care of because of the nature of the product which you are into. If you are into a leather industry, the environment which you would need is different. If you are into the edible industry, the environment would also be different in this regard. Now, as these will help in the proper functioning of the enterprise, the utilities, the next resource to be mobilized comprises various utilities that are the things which facilitate the smooth functioning of the enterprise. It includes what? It includes the water, the gas supply, the electricity, the internet facilities, the telecommunication lines, etc., as they are the things in the absence of which the best enterprise will not be able to function efficiently. So, we have discussed so many factors till now. So, before moving and explaining you the utilities, let me give you a recap of what are the vital aspects of these startups. The first important thing which is very important for you to start up is the financial resources. After you have taken care of the short term and the long term funds, the next thing which you need is your human resources, which should be in right number and of the right kind, and basically categorized into skill and the unskilled labor. Then we have the physical resources with you, that is, it includes and envelops the land and machinery, the plant and machinery, the land and building, the furniture and fixtures, the raw material, etc. So, after you have done these three vital things for the startup, which is also called as mobilizing the resources for the startup, the first most important concept is your technology. The technology has to be green, clean, because of the clean India, green India. You cannot have a technology which is going to which is going to carbonize the economy. You have to decarbonize the economy. You have to increase the sustainable footprints for the environment. You have to have the best technology with you, so that whatever technology you are using is going to give you a good mileage. It is going to, whatever technology you want, even if you want from the abroad or any kind of a global technology, you need to sign certain foreign technology transfer agreements in this regard. Plus, you have to have the approvals from the RBI, the Foreign Direct Investment Policy under the Government of India rules. So, the next aspect which we have already discussed is your accommodation, which signifies and centers around the location. And the location will have many aspects, that where the plant location will be there, where the warehouses location should be there, where will be the packaging unit, and of course the major location will be taken care of after considering the many factors like what are the general climatic conditions, because the nature of the products which you are going to deal with is different and every different product will have a different technology. The availability of the utilities, the availability of the labor, availability of the raw material, whether it has to be near to the market or near to the source. So, these are the factors which you have to judiciously combine and see them under one frame, so that whatever decisions you are taking are the best decisions ever. Now, of course, you have discussed the 5 important mobilizing resources for the startup. Now is the time to discuss the utilities. The next resource to be mobilized comprises various utilities that are the things which facilitate the smooth functioning of the enterprise. What do you mean by utilities? The utilities are, the things which assist you in taking your enterprise forward and helps you in best functioning of the organization in an efficient manner. So, what are these utilities for? It includes the water, the gas supply, electricity, internet facilities, telecommunications, etc. So, these are very pertinent, important and vital issues for you, and as these things are in absence, you will not be able to function any kind of an entrepreneur, any kind of an entrepreneurial activity efficiently. Now is the time to discuss the market. After arranging for the things which we have already discussed, that is the resources with you, then the human resource arrangements with you, the utilities with you, the overall the technology transfers and etc. We have discussed accommodation, etc. Now is the time to understand the issues relating to the market. After arranging for all the set resources of the enterprise, then it should be identified the market to which it will be catering to. It will involve the market segments, the nature of the customers. See, you have to be very particular about which market segment you are going to cater to. We have a line segment, we have the higher segment, we have the lower segment, we have the middle segment. We have diverse nature of the customers in front of you. So, which product you are dealing into, whether it is an economy product, the high level product, the products which are only used by the rich people, the products which are used by the middlemen, the products which is a necessity and of course it is used by everyone. So, these are the important decisions which you have to take, and you have to be very particular about the market segment, the customer segment which you are going to take care of. Now, we are coming on to the most important and the vital part, that is the preliminary contracts. What are preliminary contracts? The preliminary contracts are the contracts which enter into by the entrepreneur before the formal commencement of the enterprise to bring it into a running mode. They are also called the pre-incorporation contract and are usually entered into by the promoters of the company for acquiring some property or a right of the company which is yet to be incorporated. Usually, an entrepreneur enters into the preliminary contract with the following parties. The first party is a vendor. Vendor refers to the people from whom the enterprise purchases its various assets and the raw material. So, these are the preliminary contracts which are most important for the enterprise to start. Who are going to be the vendors? From where we are going to purchase the raw material, the fixed goods, the finished goods, the assets. So, these are very vital decisions because you have to see the cost factor, you have to see the market operating prices, you have to see the massive discounts which are they going to give you, etc. You definitely have to have a comparison of all the vendors which are available in the market and the vendors which will suit you as far as the cost factor is concerned. You will finally take and eventually take a decision. The contract to purchase the agreed assets and the material before the commencement of the enterprise are called the preliminary contract with the vendors. An entrepreneur must ensure that the contract with the vendor clearly communicates the terms so as to avoid any confusion regarding the terminology, performance, expectation and the service content. He should also review the contract time and again to ensure its foolproof execution. So, after you have decided who are going to be your vendors, now you have to decide who the suppliers will be. The suppliers refers to the person that supplies goods and services. He is different from the contractor who usually adds the inputs to the deliverables. They are usually the people who supply the basic utility and the services like power, water, telephone, internet, raw material, etc. An entrepreneur, after deciding to do the business with the supplier, must document the terms of the trade, the terms of the trade in a written contract covering the issues like supply conditions, ordering, delivering period, payment terms, etc. This written formal document is called as a preliminary contract with the suppliers. Let us look at on the screen. These are the various preliminary contracts. You have to have a contract with the vendor, the contract with the supplier, the contract with the banker from where you will take the financial assistance, and you have to have a principal customer who you are going to cater to. Now we will be discussing these one by one. Who are the bankers or the financial intermediaries? The most common financial intermediary is a bank, which provides the funds to the new enterprises for fulfilling their financial needs. The preliminary contracts with the banker are the contracts entered to acquire the initial funds for the formal establishment of the enterprise. The finance being the most critical part of the business, the contracts with the bankers must be entered very carefully to avoid any unwarranted financial setback. The terms and the conditions of the contract must be duly signed by both the parties in the well-drafted written agreement. What are the main customers? The main customers refers to those clients who would buy our goods and services. So, they are the prime focus which an entrepreneur has to consider, because it is the customer you have to make him happy, it is the deal which you have to make it to the customer. All the contracts entered with the initial customer who have agreed to become the buyer of our offerings are called the preliminary contract with the customer. Now, it usually comprises the terms and the conditions regarding the purchases, the types of the goods, the nature and the quality of the goods, the quantity of the goods, the price of the delivery options. These contracts must be entered carefully, as the initial customers will possibly become the lifelong customers. What is a contract management? The contract management is the management or the administration of the contracts. It is the process of systematically and efficiently managing the contract creation, execution and the analysis for the purpose of maximizing the financial and the operational performance and minimizing the risk. An entrepreneur must realize that the contracts are the foundation for all business activities and require a proper management. With the enterprises becoming more global, now we are coming on to the aspects of the contract management. This is a very vital and the pertinent issue. With the enterprise becoming more global, transparent and functionally diverged, the contract management has become a more significant instrument in allowing the enterprise to fulfill their organizational goals. Now, what is it all about? It is the first important issue about the contract initiation. It is the formal recognition of the fact that the contract is required along with the identification of the parties with whom to enter into a contract. This is the first step where the contract management starts. Now, the second issue relating to the elements of the contract management is the negotiations. What are negotiations? It refers to the conciliation between the parties to arrive at acceptable conclusions. This is the second step in contract management, which determines the terms and the conditions of the contract. The third is the contract approval. It means the final agreement of both the parties over the acceptable terms and the conditions to give the formal shape to the contract. This brings the contract into existence. Now, after we have done the contract initiation with you, the negotiation aspect, the contract approval, now is the time to do and understand what the contract execution means. It is the actual implementation of the agreed terms and the conditions of the contract which ensures the correct executions. We have the contract analysis with you. This is the final step in contract management involving a careful investigation of the executed contract. This evaluation will reveal the areas which require modifications and amendments. Then we have accommodation. Accommodation refers to the location of the business enterprise every enterprise must carefully select the most suitable location for its business operations, as it is the place which will give identity to the enterprise. It connotes to the registered office branches, warehouses, factories, packing units, etc. The following factor must be considered in a careful selection of the location. Like, you have to understand about the cheap rates of the land, the availability of the raw material, the accessibility to the market, the skilled labor, prevailing wage rates, transportation and communication facilities, road connectivity, climatic conditions, electricity, water, gas pipelines, etc. What do you understand by utilities? Utilities refers to the essential convenience services necessary for the market and making the business function efficiently. It includes the following: water. Water is the first necessity for any kind of a business. The clean, pure, undisrupted water supply must be secured by every enterprise. Then we have a sewage facility. Every enterprise must install a proper septic tank and connect it to the drainage system of having proper sewage plant with you. Then you should have a trash service also. The enterprise must arrange for proper trash management for ensuring its direct transportation to the closest landfills. Then we have to have the telecommunication services with you, which is available and which is essential for any kind of a business to start. This includes the telephone, cable TV, internet, etc. An entrepreneur can buy them as a package or procure them individually. Then we have to have the electricity with us. It involves making proper arrangements for securing undisrupted power supply. Then we have to have a basic startup problems. What are these? We have discussed what are the steps which are most importantly required, what are the services which are most importantly required to have a startup. Now is the time to discuss what are the basic setup problems, because whenever you start anything, there are a lot of problems which any entrepreneur can face. So what are these? Let us discuss and analyze. The startup problem refers to the initial teething problem faced by the new enterprise during their startup phase. Opening a new business can be an exciting and passionately rewarding experience, but on the other hand, it can be quite a complicated and challenging job. Having a knowing of these challenges which a business may encounter in your startup phase can really help in preparing for them and avoiding the common pitfalls. So following are the basic startup problems. The first is your checking the feasibility of the idea. The checking of the feasibility of the idea means whether the idea which we want to convert into the enterprise is practically feasible to be adopted or not, because certain ideas are not practical and all ideas are not practical. All practical ideas are not good. So there has to be an interplay of the idea which is practical. So you have to check the feasibility aspect and the issue relating to that idea. Now, obtaining the required licenses, as in its absence an enterprise cannot take a real shape. So unless and until you have the required licenses with you, you will not be able to take a real picture in this regard. Now we have a non-availability of required funds, as the finance forms the lifeblood of any enterprise. You need to have selecting a suitable location where the business operations will be carried out. Recruiting skilled manpower for ensuring the optimum utilization of other resources. Adequate infrastructure for facilities the smooth functioning of the business. The adequate infrastructure is most important because if the adequate infrastructure is absent, you will not be able to function the business in a very smooth manner. You have to handle the local regional problems so as to avoid any disruptions in the commencement of the business. So now we are coming to the summary part. The formal process of setting up a new enterprise starts with the mobilization of resources, which is the process of assembling and organizing all the necessary resources for bringing an enterprise into the existence. Then, of course, you need to be very specific about the preliminary contracts, as they are the contracts which enter into the enterprise before the formal commencement of the enterprise to bring it into a running mode. So, preliminary contracts are the contracts which you do with the suppliers, which you do with the customers, which you do with the overall the utility providers, with the organization. So, if they are not there, of course, you will be having a lot of problems in order to set up and start up any kind of a business. So, just the final points of today's lecture. So, let me give you a complete recap of whatever we did today, so that you have a final analysis of how the things are going to set up, how the resources are going to be mobilized as far as any business is concerned. Now, we start with the mobilizing resource for the startup. Every entrepreneur, after getting the approval from the business, they need to have to be registered, obtained the license, and only then the enterprise can be started. So, this starts with the mobilization of resources in the process of assembling and organizing all the necessary actions, and usually we need to have the following mobilizing resources for the startup. The first is your financial resources. It is foremost requirement for arrange the requisite finances for meeting the resource requirement, and you need to have a deep analysis that how much funds you have and how much funds you need from the outside. There are two terms of the the funds requirement, the long term and the short term. The long term funds would include the equity, debentures, preference shareholders, loans from the financial institutions, the public deposits, etc. So, you need to have a cost benefit analysis of all the the sources of finance for the long term, and then you have to decide that which one suits you the most. Similarly, we have the short term requirements, which we also call as a working capital requirement, and they are basically taken care of, and the basic sources of the short term funds are the trade creditors, the commercial banks, the customer advances, deposits, borrowings, etc. So, after you have mobilized the finances, the requisite amount of finances, now is the time for you to understand the human resources. So, it is the most important resource which sets the other resources to utilization. So, acquiring the right number, the right people becomes the next important resource to be mobilized. Now, it includes the skilled labor, unskilled labor. The human resources to be chosen must be very carefully done, because you have to optimize the resources. Neither the number should be more nor the number should be less, because it involves a huge cost also. So, the third most important thing is your physical resources. The physical resources includes the land and building, plant and machinery, furniture, fixtures, raw material, etc. So, every entrepreneur must design and develop a suitable process of procurement of the physical resources depending upon the size, the material required, and the supply resources with you. The fourth most important mobilizing resource is your technology part. The next important resource to be mobilized is a technology which we will be using for our enterprise. For using a global technology, if at all, you need to have the approvals under the foreign direct investment policy and the foreign technology transfer agreements. And the next is your accommodation, that is, you are talking here about the location of the plant. And when you are deciding the location of the plant, you need to see so many factors together in one frame, synthesize all the information together, and then if all the instruments are played, and then you have a symphony. So, similarly, whenever you want to have the best selection for the location of the business, you need to understand, analyze each factors together in one frame. Only then the judicial decision, the final decision for the location will be the final and the good one. If you are into edible, you have to have even the products, the nature of the products will be different for the different climatic conditions. So, it is you who have to see that which climate suits you, which area suits you, whether you have the utilities available there, whether you have the supply of raw material there, whether it is near to the market, etc. So you have to see and understand these factors together under one frame. The next most important thing is a utility. Utility is basically the resources to be mobilized and which facilitates the smooth functioning of the enterprise. This includes the gas supply, electricity, water, internet facility, telecommunication, etc. Next, we have to have the issues of the market. After arranging all the above resources for the enterprise, you should be able to identify the market to which you will be catering to. You have to understand which market segment, which is the nature of the contract, etc. Now you are coming on to the preliminary contracts. These are the contracts which are entered into by the entrepreneur before the formal commencement of the enterprise into a very important running model. So what are these? These are the agreement with the vendors, then of course the agreement with the suppliers who are going to be the best suppliers for you. Then you have to have a written agreement or the consent agreement for the preliminary contracts with the suppliers, etc. So you have to have with the vendors, with the suppliers, with the bankers and with the preliminary customer, because it is the customer which is the final focus. Now, whenever you have to finalize the preliminary contract with the banker or the financial intermediary, the most important financial intermediary is a bank, which provides us the funds for the new enterprise for fulfilling their financial needs. Now, before a loan is extended to them, you have to understand the financial, economic, physical viability of the loans also. Anything which is adding to the pollution or adding to the carbon footprints should not be allowed, because otherwise bank will also be called as an indirect polluter. Now, the preliminary contracts with the bankers are also very important to acquire the initial funds for the formal establishment of the enterprise. Finance being the most critical part of the business, the contracts with the bankers must be entered into very carefully to avoid the unwarranted financial setbacks. The terms and the conditions for the contract must be duly signed by both the parties in the well-drafted written agreement. What are the main customers? The main customers refers to those clients who would buy the goods and services. All the contracts entered with the initial customers who have agreed to become the buyer of the offerings of the preliminary contracts with the customer. So it is usually comprising of the terms and the conditions regarding the purchase of the types of the goods, the quality of the goods, etc. You have to have a very important bonding with your customer, the initial customers, and the possible becoming the lifelong customer. So your focus has to be, enhancing the number of the customers for long. Then we are coming to the last part, that is what are the aspects of a contract management. The term contract management is catching a lot of noise these days. The contract management is the management for administration of the contracts, and it is the process of systematically, efficiently managing the contract creation, execution and analysis for the purpose of maximizing the financial and operating performance and the minimizing risk. An entrepreneur must realize the contract. They are the foundations for all business activities and require the proper management. With the enterprises becoming more global, transparent and functionally diverged, the contract management has become more significant instrument in allowing the enterprises to fulfill their organizational goals. So, coming on to the contract initiation, this is the first formal recognition of the fact that the contract is required, along with the identification of the parties, with the first step where the contract management is done. The second aspect is your negotiations. It means the conciliation between the parties to arrive at an acceptable conclusions, and this is the second step in contract management, which determines the terms and the conditions of the contract. Next, we have a contract approval. It means the final agreement of both the parties over the acceptance terms and the conditions to give the formal shape to the contract. This brings the contract into existence. Then we have the contract execution, which is again a most important part. It is the actual implementation of the agreed terms and the conditions of the contract, which ensures the correct evaluation. Then we have contract analysis. This is the final step in the contract management, involving a careful investigation of the executed contract. The evaluation will reveal the areas which require the modification and amendments. Then we have the accommodation and utilities. Accommodation refers to the location of the business enterprise. Every enterprise must carefully select the suitable location for its business, as it is the place which will identify the enterprise. It connotes to the registered office, branches, warehouses, factories, packing units. The following factors must be considered in a careful selection of the location: the cheap rates of the land, availability of the raw material, accessibility to the market, the skilled labor, preliminary wage rates, transportation and communication facilities, road connectivity, climatic conditions, electricity, water, gas, pipelines, etc. The utilities. The utilities refers to the essential convenience services necessary for making the business function efficiently. It includes the following: the water, because unless and until you have a pure, clean, undisrupted supply of water, you cannot function. Similarly, the similar issues are for the sewage. The similar issues are for the the trash services, the telecommunication services, the electricity services. The startup problems are immense. The startup problems refers to the initial teething problems which they suffer. Opening of the new business can be exciting and passionately rewarding experience, but on the other side we have the darker side of it. It can be complicated, it can be a very challenging job. Knowing these challenges which the business may encounter in your startup phase can really help in preparing for them, avoiding the common pitfalls. The following are the basic startups of the problems. The first is your checking feasibility of the ideas, which means whether the idea which we want to convert into the enterprise is practically feasible, can be adopted or not, obtaining the required licenses, as it is in the absence of the enterprise cannot take a real shape. The non-availability of the required funds can be a big problem, because the finances are the lifeblood of the business, and if you are having the scarcity of the funds, it is going to be a very chaotic thing. Then selecting the suitable location where the business operations will be carried out. Recruitment, the skilled manpower for ensuring the optimum utilization can be another problem. The adequate infrastructure, if it is not available, can be another problem, and handling the local regional problems can be another problem. So, coming on to the final few lines about it, the contract management which we have thought about is the process of systematically, efficiently managing the contract creation, execution and analysis for the purpose of maximizing the financial operational performance and minimizing the risk. Every enterprise must carefully select the most suitable location for its business operations, that is the place which will identify to the enterprises. Utilities refers to the essential convenience services necessary for making the business function efficient. So, the startup problem refers to initial teething problem faced by new enterprise during their startup phase. So, with these words, I hope the concept of this overall, the resource mobilization is very clear to you. If you have any questions, I am open to that. But the startup problems must be very diligently handled by the the overall entrepreneur. Otherwise, it is going to be a lot of chaotic things which the entrepreneur has to take care of. So, basically, when you talk about the preliminary contracts, they are obviously done in a very efficient manner, because these are the startup things. If the first step is not kept in a right direction, then of course it is going to be a problematic thing for the rest of the journey of the business entrepreneur. So, these things have to be very diligently decided, the long terms, the short terms, etc. So, I hope the mobilizing resources for the startup, the initial hiccups for the problems, the preliminary contracts, the management contracts concepts are clear to you. So, with these words, thank you so much.
With this note, thank you so much for giving us this productive session on resource mobilization. We have some time left, and if you wish to ask questions, feel free to talk to us. Ma'am, we are talking about mobilization of resources in detail. So, how helpful is mobilization of resources when we talk about entrepreneurship?
See, whenever the startup business is there, or for example, any kind of a business is there, the most important thing which an entrepreneur can do is to mobilize the resources. Now, resources can be many. It can be money, it can be technology, it can be raw material, it can be the government policy. So, whatever things which are associated and connected with the business, he has to take and collect them together so as to get the enterprise set up and get it running. If he has taken the business proposals, he has submitted the business ideas, the project report is ready, he has taken the the required licenses. Now is the time to start with the mobilizing of resources. The first thing which he does is he does the financial resource mobilization, which is most important because it is the lifeblood of the business, it is the stream of the business, and in case you need to have a long term and a short term funds, you have to make a draft your resource requirement accordingly. You have to tailor made your needs, because you have to have a fixed working capital requirement and you have a minimum working capital requirement, the fixed asset requirement. So you have to judiciously plan how much funds you need for the long term, how much funds you need for the short term, and from where the resources will be taken care of, from which bank. Similarly, we need to mobilize the human resources also, because if they are not there, the things will not be transformed, and it is the human resources also which takes care of the enterprise moving, because they are the only living factors of production. So after collecting the money aspect, the human resource, the next resource mobilization is relating to the physical resources, that is land building, plant machinery, furniture fixtures, raw material, etc. So after that he has to take care of the technology aspect, which technology, if it is from the foreign, then he has to sign a proper legal agreement, transfers. Then you have to take decisions relating to the accommodation, which location, then you have to see the utilities which are available, the market conditions, and of course all these things together, they are called as the mobilizing resources for any kind of a startup.